Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. Now, today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be diving deep into braille literacy in Malaysia.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's, you think about braille and it's like, okay, is that still relevant,
Right.
in the digital age?
Mhm.
But when you really start digging into it and looking at all the research and all the articles written about this, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's a really interesting area.
So to give everybody a little bit of background before we get too far, we've got a whole stack of stuff here today.
Mm-hmm.
We've got articles about braille literacy. We've got articles talking about visually impaired communities. We've got articles with experts, from organizations like the Malaysian Association for the Blind.
Right.
And then we've got stories from individuals, who have been affected by this.
Yeah, that's a really rich collection of sources
Yeah.
to get a sense of what's going on there.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to dive into this with you and see what we can pull out of all this.
Yeah, me too.
So one of the first things that really jumped out to me was a statistic from a 2021 Bernama report that said only 30% of registered visually impaired individuals in Malaysia are proficient in Braille.
Wow.
And that number really shocked me. Like, you
Yeah.
think about, okay,
Yeah.
if you dedicate yourself to learning how to read,
Right.
but then there's just not the materials there.
Yeah.
You can't find books.
Right.
How frustrating would that be?
I mean, it's almost like learning a language and then just not having anyone to talk to
Yeah.
or anything to read, It's
Right,
like,
yeah.
what's the point? It really highlights
Yeah.
how important it is to have those resources available.
And how much of a barrier that creates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you can't read,
Yeah,
if you can't get access to information,
absolutely.
then it's going to impact your education. It's going to impact your job opportunity.
Exactly. And this is an issue that often gets overlooked
Right.
because we think, oh, well, there's technology now.
Right.
We have audiobooks, we have apps.
Yeah.
But that's not suitable for everyone.
Exactly. And that's something that really stuck out to me from an article in UTHM News.
Oh, interesting.
They were talking about how technology is not a perfect solution.
Mm.
Like, take, for instance, the deafblind community.
Right.
They rely so heavily on tactile information,
Mm-hmm.
And so Braille is absolutely essential for them.
It really reinforces the idea that Braille is a fundamental right,
Yes.
not just an alternative.
Yeah.
It's about ensuring that everyone has access to information
Right.
and education.
Yeah, one of the articles we came across was a story about Esuma Shangari. She's a Braille translator and an editor at the Malaysian Association for the Blind.
Okay.
And she was talking about how she learned Braille at a young age, and she really fell in love with reading.
Oh, wow.
But then she quickly ran out of materials.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, like, can you imagine just being so excited about learning?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you hit this wall,
Mm-hmm.
and there's nothing left for you to read.
It really kind of stifles that passion
Yeah,
for learning.
absolutely.
And it also kind of perpetuates this harmful stereotype,
Yeah.
that visually impaired individuals can't do much,
Right.
The expectation is, oh, they'll end up selling tissues or something.
Right.
And it's because they haven't had the opportunity to
Yeah.
to be given the same chances as everyone else.
It makes you realize that Braille's not just about reading. It's about, empowerment.
Exactly.
It's about independence and breaking down those barriers.
It is.
And speaking of barriers, one of the big ones that came up a lot in the research was the lack of Braille materials being produced in Malaysia. And George Thomas, who's the CEO of MAB,
Okay.
was quoted in a Bernana article
Mhm.
talking about the challenges they face,
Okay.
with copyright issues and high production costs
Right.
and bureaucratic hurdles.
So it's not an easy thing.
No. And it's not just about, okay, well, it costs a lot to print
Right.
these Braille books. There's all these other layers to it.
Yep.
And then you add in something like the COVID-19 pandemic,
Yeah.
and it really brings this issue to the forefront.
Right.
Because think about it. If you're visually impaired and you can't access those crucial updates and guidelines
That makes you wonder.
in a format that you can understand.
How are we ensuring that everyone has equal access to this information?
Right.
Especially during emergencies.
It really makes you stop and think
Yeah.
about, are we really doing enough to make sure that everyone
Yeah.
is able to fully participate in society?
Absolutely.
So that was kind of the big overview of what we found in the research.
Okay.
And now I think it's time to really start digging into some of the specific articles.
Awesome. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
Let's do it.
All right.
Okay.
So we're going to start with an article from Asian Beacon.
Okay. So this article from Asian Beacon by Ruth Yong Wang Thien, it's really powerful.
Yeah. And she does such a great job of personalizing this whole issue.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we were looking at all those statistics,
Mhm.
but then to hear it from somebody who's actually lived through this.
Exactly. It puts a human face on it.
Yeah. And it really drives home the point that, we're not just talking about numbers. We're talking about people's lives.
Right. And the challenges they face every day.
And she was born blind due to premature birth.
Oh, wow.
So she really, experienced these challenges from day one.
Right. From the very beginning.
And she talks a lot about the feelings of isolation
Yeah.
and lack of support that she encountered growing up.
That must have been incredibly difficult.
Yeah. And she brings up a really interesting point about the disappearance of braille from ATMs.
Oh, yeah.
Remember those tactile buttons?
I do.
It seems like such a small thing.
Right.
But for somebody who's visually impaired,
It's huge.
it makes a world of difference.
It's that access
Right.
to being able to do things independently.
Yeah. And now with everything moving towards touchscreens.
It's interesting how that's kind of shifted. Because for a lot of people, touchscreens are more accessible.
Yeah.
But for others, it's actually a barrier.
It's a step backwards.
Yeah, and it highlights how important it is
Yeah.
to think about accessibility from the very beginning.
Right. Like when you're designing these systems.
Yeah. Design it with everyone in mind.
Not just as an afterthought.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's not just ATMs, right? Like she talks about the challenges of public transportation.
Oh, sure.
Navigating unfamiliar spaces.
Right.
Even just the stigma associated with blindness.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one.
It really highlights the need for a more inclusive environment
Absolutely.
where we're considering the needs of everyone.
And not just the physical accommodations,
Yeah.
but also those societal attitudes.
Right. Like the expectation that blind people should just stay home.
Yeah.
It's so limiting.
And really based on prejudice and misunderstanding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, she attended both specialized schools for the blind
Okay.
and mainstream schools with inclusive programs.
Interesting. So she's seen both sides of it. It's really valuable.
And it really gives us some insight into the different approaches to educating visually impaired students in Malaysia.
Okay.
She talks about how, there's definitely been progress made in inclusive education,
Yeah.
but there's still gaps.
Okay.
Like she mentioned braille books arriving late in the semester,
Oh, wow.
which puts her at a disadvantage
Yeah, absolutely.
compared to her classmates.
You're already starting behind.
Right. And then you get to university and a lot of the learning materials aren't accessible.
Oh, no.
She talks about, scanned PDFs that screen readers can't interpret.
Oh, so she had to manually convert them?
Yeah. To Word documents just to keep up with those studies.
Wow. That's a lot of extra work.
And it really highlights the need for digital accessibility
Yeah.
to be a core consideration, not an afterthought.
Make it work for everyone from the start.
Right. And then when we get into the employment side of things,
That's
it's, same issues.
Yeah.
She talks about how despite having, education and skills, a lot of visually impaired individuals struggle to find jobs.
Beyond those stereotypical roles.
Yeah. Like selling tissues,
Yeah.
which we talked about earlier.
It's heartbreaking
Yeah.
because it really shows that bias in the workforce.
It's not about their ability.
Exactly.
It's about perception.
Right. And not recognizing their potential.
Right. Fortunately, there are organizations in Malaysia that are dedicated to supporting the visually impaired community.
Okay.
That's good to hear. She mentions the Malaysian Association for the Blind,
Mm-hmm.
the National Council for the Blind,
Okay.
and the Malaysian Foundation for the Blind.
So these are key players.
They're doing some really amazing work providing braille literacy classes, vocational training,
Wow.
support with adaptive technologies.
So they're really covering all the bases.
Yeah, they're really advocating for the rights of visually impaired individuals.
It's inspiring to see that kind of support.
It is. Now, going back to the production of braille materials,
Okay.
we talked about George Thomas earlier.
Right. The CEO of MAP.
Yeah, and he was saying that translating any material into braille isn't as simple as it sounds.
Okay. So there are challenges there.
Yeah, copyright issues, high production costs,
Right.
bureaucratic hurdles.
It's complex.
It's a mess.
It sounds like it.
And it really hinders the widespread availability of braille materials.
Yeah, because it's not enough to just say Braille's important.
Right.
You have to have the systems in place to actually produce it and distribute it.
And make it accessible.
Exactly.
It's a multifaceted problem.
It sounds like it.
And it's not going to be easy to solve.
No, but it sounds like there are people working on it.
Yes, and that's the encouraging part.
Yeah.
One of the articles from UTHM News was talking about the potential of digital braille
Oh, interesting.
and how that could really revolutionize how these materials are produced and accessed.
Okay, so like no more bulky Braille books.
Right. No more paper shortages, no more shipping delays.
That's amazing.
And imagine, an entire library at your fingertips
Wow.
with refreshable braille displays.
It opens up so many possibilities
It does.
for education and just, accessing information.
Yeah, and it's not just about convenience.
Right.
It could really make real-time communication and information sharing a reality
That's
for
incredible.
visually impaired individuals.
Yeah,
So that's really exciting to think about.
it is, but I also imagine there are still some challenges.
Yeah, the cost of the technology.
Right.
Not everyone has access to computers or the internet.
So it's not a perfect solution.
No, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
It is, and I remember reading about those young researchers
Yeah.
who developed that low-cost Braille learning device,
Yeah, that was incredible.
and they were talking about how it could potentially be adapted
Mhm.
to work with 8-dot Braille.
Which would open it up to even more languages and
Right, right.
applications.
Yeah, so the technology is constantly evolving.
And it's really pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But it's also important to remember that technology is not a silver bullet. We still need to address those systemic challenges
Yeah,
we talked about earlier.
like ensuring that everyone has access to a good education
Right.
and that the materials are available.
And that the attitudes are there,
Exactly.
to support visually impaired individuals.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, I
Yeah.
wanted to touch on something that Wang Thien brought up in her article
Okay.
about the role of the church
Oh, yeah.
in supporting the visually impaired community.
She had some really interesting thoughts on that.
She did. She suggested that churches can offer spiritual guidance
Mhm.
and emotional support,
Which are so important.
especially for those who are experiencing social isolation.
Right. It's about creating that sense of belonging.
Yeah. And making people feel welcome.
But she also challenged churches to go beyond that
Okay.
and to provide practical assistance.
Like what kind of things?
Things like braille versions of worship materials,
Oh, okay.
audio recordings of sermons,
Right.
even just transportation to and from services.
Yeah. So it's about removing those barriers.
Yes. And making it easier for visually impaired individuals to participate.
Right.
And it's not just about, being charitable.
Right.
It's about making them active participants.
Yeah, making them feel valued.
And that really got me thinking about, that sense of belonging and how that could play a role in addressing this whole issue.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, like, could that be one approach to addressing the lack of support that visually impaired individuals often face?
It's definitely something to think about because it really emphasizes that inclusivity
Yeah,
goes beyond just physical accessibility.
Right.
It's about creating a space where everyone feels welcome and empowered to participate.
yeah. It makes you wonder if that broader societal awareness and support could be the key to unlocking a brighter future for visually impaired individuals.
I think it's a crucial piece of the puzzle because while technology offers promising solutions, true progress requires a fundamental shift in how we perceive and address disability.
Yeah, like moving beyond just charity
Exactly.
and really embracing a mindset of inclusion and empowerment.
Absolutely.
So what can our listeners do
Well,
to contribute to this change? What's our call to action today?
I think a great first step is to educate yourself about Braille
Yeah.
and the challenges faced by the visually impaired community.
Mhm.
Seek out stories, articles, resources that shed light on their experiences.
Right. Knowledge is power.
Exactly.
And once you have that knowledge,
Share it.
talk to people.
Yeah.
Tell your friends, your family, your colleagues
Exactly.
about the importance of Braille literacy and accessibility.
Because even just those casual conversations can spark awareness.
Right. And it might inspire action.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of your voice.
Huh.
You might be surprised by how many people are eager to learn and make a difference once they understand the issues.
Another concrete step is to support those organizations
Yeah.
that we talked about earlier, like the Malaysian Association for the Blind, the National Council for the Blind,
Right.
the Malaysian Foundation for the Blind.
They're doing such important work.
They are. And even small donations of time, money, resources.
Can make a big difference.
Yeah. And if you're looking to make a more local impact,
Yeah.
why not explore organizations in your own community?
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah. There might be opportunities to volunteer donate Braille materials
Mm-hmm.
or just learn more about how you can support visually impaired individuals in your area.
It's amazing how many ways there are to get involved.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Braille literacy in Malaysia, let's leave our listeners with this thought.
Okay.
Imagine a world where information and education are genuinely accessible to everyone, regardless of their abilities.
Wow.
A world where Braille is celebrated,
Yes.
not as a relic of the past,
Mm.
but as a vital tool for empowerment and equality.
That's the world we're striving to create.
And it's a world that's within reach
I believe it is.
if we all do our part to
Yeah.
foster understanding, challenge stereotypes, and champion inclusivity. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to take action. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep exploring the world with open minds and compassionate hearts.